All right, the very first activity that I like to do with my students is to have them model and build a book bag tag that we can show clip on their book bag with a small carabiner. Um, so there's also fully dimensioned and screenshots of how to go through this. Of course, walking through this with the students, it's very easy. Um, you do, I do, you do, and I model it, and then the students copy it, and it's really not that tough. There's also an opportunity to create a second one where after modeling the book bag tag, they can create a slightly smaller version with their. Okay, so let's close this file. Let's create a new design, and we'll go ahead and save this right away and save this as name tag, or you put your initials on the end of it. I'm going to save this one as Mrs. Conrad. I'm going to make this one for my wife. So we'll click save, and we will start out with a primitive shape. Once that have saved and I've seen that there, I'm going to minimize that so I have a little more real estate on my screen. And I'm going to create a box. So when I first have that pop up, I get to choose what face I want to draw on. Let's draw on the XY plane. I'm going to select the origin, and I click once and drag, and let's make that 50 millimeters by 100 millimeters. And it allows me to push pull, but I can't get the 2 millimeters I want, so I have to go in and type 2 millimeters. Okay, so next I want to chamfer the two of the edges. So I'll go to the modify panel, select chamfer. Let's pick just one small little edge there, and the opposite side. In order to zoom in and out, I'm using the scroll wheel. In order to pan, I'm holding that scroll wheel down on my mouse. Now, of course, once I've selected those two, I could manually push pull, or I could type a number. I want 15 millimeters, so this time I can drag exactly to that, and I don't have to type a number. I'll say OK. After doing that, I'm going to round those edges off. So I'm going to modify that with the fillet tool, and I want all of those edges I just created with that chamfer. Of course, I might need to use the view cube to rotate around, make sure I get all four of those small edges. And let's do how about an 8 millimeter radius? The other way you can do the fillet tool is to just under the Modify tab use the Press Pull command. And this is a really powerful tool in Fusion 360. You'll notice that the short key for that is a Q. So if I go in, I can select the other two corners opposite of that where I put the chamfers on, and let's put a 15 millimeter chamfer, or I'm sorry, 15 millimeter fillet on the other side. Okay, at this point you will see that I have the basic shape for my luggage tag outlined here. And you see my design history back here, and I could drag that back and go back in time and scroll through my different steps that I used to build this shape. And how this is different from Inventor is I have not really used a sketch yet. I'm just using the Modify tab and creating things with primitives. Now I do need a sketch because I want to put a border around this and add some text. So I'm going to create a sketch. I could pick one of the origin planes, but I also can pick any face that I want on any geometry that I've already modeled. So I'm going to select the top face there, which is the front in this case, but and we will select offset, I click offset, and then I can drag in, and I want to offset -3 millimeters. And it would take forever to try to drag that to the perfect number, so it's best just to type it. I'll finish the sketch, and then I will do an extrusion where I'm going to just select that border, and let's extrude that a distance of 1.2 millimeters. After that extrusion, we will go in and put a chamfer on the outside and the inside edges of that border of 0.8 millimeters. And you'll see that kind of eases those edges a little bit, and it also helps with the 3D printing. It makes it look a little better. After doing that, we need a hole in here if we're going to clip this on our book bag. So I'm going to select the hole tool, and I need to be a little careful when I do this. I want to make sure I just plop this on the surface somewhere. You'll notice that there's all these like special points that kind of show up, midpoints and endpoints. And if I click right here, don't do this, but if I click right here, it will lock it into that coordinate. So I don't want it at that midpoint, but if I do want that geometry, sometimes it is helpful. This time, let's just plop it on the face here. And in the dialog box, I want a diameter of 7 millimeters for my hole. I want my distance to be all the way through. And if it's going all the way through, you're always best to pick all instead of typing the number for the thickness, because if you pick all and decide to change the thickness, it will still drill all the way through. And then I have the reference dimensions. Let's dimension from the top edge to put in the middle. It would be 25 millimeters. And then I'll pick a separate reference point here. And to reference to the inside edge of that border would be 4 millimeters. And that moves my hole over next to the border. That's not super critical, but we do want it kind of close to the edge, so it makes it easy to clip our carabiner on. Okay, I've made a lot of changes, so it would be a good idea to click Save. You'll notice when I do that, I went from version 0 to now it says version 1, and actually now version 2. It's updated. So as I continue to make edits in this, it does also save backup copies of my steps throughout my process that I could go backwards on my design. I could go backwards, and in my design history, I could update and promote any one of those steps that I have saved. So it's a good idea to save early and save often. Now, once I have my basic shape, I just need to add some text. So in order to do that, I need to have a sketch on the top face, and under the Create tab on the panel, we will create some text. Let's go ahead and type Mrs. Conrad, and let's try 14 millimeters and make it bold text. I think that's a size that's going to work pretty good for this. Of course, I can move this around, and I can also just kind of eyeballing this, put this on, rotate this at an angle, and this is just kind of like get it to where you think it looks good, and that's what we'll go with. Putting it on an angle is optional, but I think it's kind of cool because that's hard to do that with other programs. I'm going to say OK. Okay, if I want additional text on there, what I have to do is create text again. Let's kind of click maybe where I want it. I'm going to type the word room. Make it maybe 12 millimeters bold, type 127. Let's make that bold, and let's make that 15 millimeter font. Say OK. And then I can also just kind of grab those text boxes and shift them around. Once I've shifted all of them, I can finish my sketch. And I always like to kind of go back to an isometric or perspective view. So that way when I go to extrude, I can kind of see what I'm doing. I can see what's happening. I'm going to select all three of my text boxes and extrude a distance of 1.2 millimeters. If I look at that, if it doesn't automatically, if it wants to add a new body, that's going to be a problem. We want to make sure that when we do that extrusion of the text, that we want to do a join extrusion. Say OK. All right, so now I have my name tag fully modeled, and if I want to 3D print, I'll go up to File, 3D Print. It automatically wants to try to send it to a 3D print program. We only have that on a couple computers in our classroom, so we just need to uncheck that box, and we have to say, what do we want to export to the STI file to 3D print? So if I select all that, now I can say OK, and now this will put this in my downloads folder, and I want it to be, so I'll just go to my downloads folder, and I want to save it as name tag, my initials. Okay, once you do that, you can upload your name tag into the 3D print folder and run the print job on one of our printers. Of course, after you make your initial name tag, then we also have the ability to, look at the directions, follow the similar process to model a name tag for your key ring. And that's the initial activity for introduction to Fusion 360.